and tarot. I'm really excited about the stories we have for you tonight, and I'm also really excited about the tarot deck we'll be using. It's the Tarot of Jean Dodal, sometimes called the Dodali deck, and it was manufactured in Lyons in 1701, and I love the history of the cards and the power of these images to speak to us across the centuries. And that's why I think tarot and storytelling go so well together. Is the archetypal imagery allows us to, when we look at the images of the cards, we can reframe and understand the stories we're telling ourselves about our own lives and the stories in our head, and understand them in different ways. And so I do read tarot cards. I'm not a psychic. I don't, well, I do believe in psychics. I know one, but I'm not a psychic. I don't pretend to be in touch with anything from like another world or anything like that. I just interpret the cards and the poetry of the images. And here's a little glimpse of what the deck looks like, some of the cards, and we'll, as we feature storytellers, after each story is told, I'm going to pair that story with an appropriate card, and then at the end of the night, each card that we've selected is going to be put together to collectively create a reading for the night. And for the first time since we've started doing these from quarantine, I'm going to be telling a story as well. And so for my own story, I'm just going to grab a random card from the deck and then try to apply that to what's been shared. And so hopefully the gods of synchronicity will be nice to me and I'll have a card that makes sense. But we'll see as we get there. I'm really thrilled. I'd much prefer to be doing in-person shows, but I'm thrilled to be doing this. And one of the great things about technology is you can expand your community and reach out. So I'm thrilled to have a couple New Yorkers with us tonight. And Chris Corbell, who lives in Los Angeles, but boy, he's got a New York soul. So he's here as well. But coming up first, I'm pleased to introduce storyteller Sam Dingman. And
hello, everybody. I hope that the shut-in environment that we all find ourselves in is treating you well, and thank you all for joining us tonight for a little bit of storytelling. I want to tell you a story that happened to me a couple years ago. I was headed to a family reunion, and this was a family reunion, not for my family, but for the family of my girlfriend at the time.
No.
Not my current excellent girlfriend.
Excellent.
This was a previous girlfriend who, at the time, I had decided I was ready to propose marriage to. I was all in. But there was a little bit of an issue, which is that I didn't really get along with or connect with her family. And a big part of that was because her family was largely comprised of what I like to call outside people, by which I mean people who like to spend time outside. I am what I like to call an inside person. I work in radio and podcasting, which means I spend most of my time in rooms that are scientifically engineered to deny the existence of outside. And I have to say, under the current circumstances, advantage inside people. But at the time, this was well before coronavirus, of course, I was really nervous about going on this family reunion because when I asked her what the activities were going to be at the family reunion, she said it'll probably be a lot of hiking, really just enjoying the great outdoors. And I really wanted to make a good impression on this trip because, like I said, I was gearing up for this proposal. So I was feeling really nervous about it, and I get there, and I have to say, so this is a weird story to tell this to your current girlfriend, but
it's fine.
Here we go.
It's all about.
Yeah. So, oh God. It's a new experience to tell a story into a laptop, and also a new experience to tell the story under these circumstances. So anyway, so I get to the family reunion, and actually it starts off great because it turns out that in addition to the outside people in her family, there's also a large contingent of old wasps in a wood-paneled basement drinking martinis. And that's peak inside person behavior. I am really, really good at that. And so I thought, this is where I'm going to make my play. I'm going to sit down here with these folks in tweed, and I'm going to put a little gin, and I'm just going to shout the word vermouth into this martini glass, and I am going to get through this thing, and I'm going to make the impression I came here to make. So I'm maybe a martini and a half in, and my girlfriend comes downstairs and she says, hey, we're about to head out for an HIKE. Think you probably want to get in on that, right? And in this moment, I think to myself, Sam, you have an option here. You could stay in this basement and do the thing that you are very, very good at. Or you could go do this thing that you're terrible at and basically guarantee that you're going to mess up the entire opportunity of being here. But I had convinced myself that this was a gap I had to bridge, and so I said, all right, great, I'll go on the hike. So we set out, and at first it's going great. We get up to the top of this mountain, literally, the top of this mountain. I was informed by the outside people on the hike that this is known as summiting, which they had done several dozen times. This was my first summit, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. But then the scene changed a little bit because some clouds rolled in, and it started to pour down rain. And I don't mean just that it was raining heavily. I mean a torrential, biblical downpour, like the kind of rain where the drops are so fat that it hurts your skin. Now, for my girlfriend's family, no problem. They're outside people. They're wearing waterproof pants. I was wearing basically the exact same outfit that you see here. Button-down shirt, pair of jeans, and because I wanted to make a good impression, I was also wearing a powder blue sport coat. Not exactly biblical downpour attire. Fortunately, one of my girlfriend's cousins reaches into his backpack and he says, oh, I actually brought an umbrella. Here, why don't you put this up? So I said, great, there's only one way for me to look more ridiculous. I will happily accept this. So I take the umbrella, I put it up, and we start to walk down the mountain. But we only get a couple of steps before I feel something that I've never felt before. And this is what I felt. I felt what I imagined was the hand of God reaching out of the sky, grabbing the top of the umbrella, lifting me into the air, and then throwing me to the ground with holy might. So much so that I hit the ground really hard, and then I bounced back up again. And there was an accompanying sound, which I will imitate for you now. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it over this connection, but imagine the most terrifying explosion you've ever heard. Kablam! And as I'm recovering from this, I hear one of my girlfriend's other cousins say this phrase that it was so memorable. I've never forgotten it. The phrase was, drop the fucking umbrella. So I throw the umbrella to the ground. And just before I do that, I notice this white light racing past my peripheral vision. And when I release the umbrella to the ground, I notice that the top of it is smoking. And I realize in this moment that I have just been struck by lightning. Now, when you are an inside person, something that people sometimes say to you is, what are you afraid of going outside? You think you're going to get struck by lightning? So I was completely terrified, and as soon as I realized that I was okay, something else almost as unlikely as being struck by lightning happened, which is that I looked around at this group of people who until that moment I had felt like I could never ever have any possible connection with. And I thought to myself, this is my family or my future family, and I have to make sure everybody's okay. And that shocked me emotionally as much as the lightning had literally shocked me. And I ran around and we all made sure that we were okay. Thankfully, everybody was. And we made it down the mountain and everything was fine. But in the aftermath of this, my girlfriend and I were talking and we were trying to figure out what to make of it. And she, being a very rational person, decided to look up on the internet, what are the odds of being struck by lightning? Which it turns out are 1 in 15,300. So it's as close to random as you can get. It's statistically meaningless. But when something like this happens, that's so scary, when you get that close to, in an instant, literally being blinked out of existence, you want it to mean something. You want something that painful and that powerful to reorient the way that you see the world. But try as we might, we couldn't come up with anything other than the randomness of this statistic. So some time went by, and actually not long ago, I found myself telling this story to a group of people, and when I finished, one of them came up to me, and it was this old woman, and she grabbed my arm, and she looked me right in the eyes, and she said, "Listen to me. What happened to you is a blessing. It's called a darshan. Are you a Buddhist?" And I said, "No. What's about to happen?" And she said, "A darshan is a divine experience. And when you got struck by lightning, that was the universe telling you that you are a holder of light." And then she disappeared. Like, I am not totally convinced she was ever there in the first place. But these words that she left me with have really stuck with me. And it's made me think that that is actually the lesson that I was supposed to take from being struck by lightning. Because the truth is, my girlfriend and I, as evidenced by the fact that I'm now sitting here with a different girlfriend, we did not get married. And if I'm honest, I should have known that we weren't going to get married. There were too many things that I had come up with as problems. One of which was the fact that I felt so different from her family, and I had convinced myself, I had told myself this very convincing story that I was never going to be like them and we were never going to get along. But what happened in the moment that I was struck by lightning is, instead of seeing the worst possibilities of how this could work out, I saw the best. I held on to a more light-filled idea of who we could be to each other. And so, even though that relationship didn't work out, the lesson that I took from that is very clear to me, which is that no matter what, no matter how much it hurts, when I have the option, I want to always try to hold on to the light. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. That is an incredible story. I'm so glad Sam's alive to share that with us, and that he got the insight he needed. Good heavens. Well, he was going through that story. He mentioned the sort of facing the randomness of it and holding on to the statistic for a while, and I was struck by that. So the first card I was tempted to pull a card for him was the Wheel of Fortune, which is the Wheel of Fortune turns and you go up and you go down. But the more I thought about it, though, the more I thought there was a more appropriate choice to make. And so the card I'm going to pair for with Sam for his story is the Magician. And the Magician in modern tarot decks is much more of like a ceremonial magician, casting incantations and spells. But in the traditional Marseille decks, like the one we're using tonight, he's doing prestidigitation. He's got his implements in front of him on a table. He's doing sleight of hand. And to me, that's a few elements of that story. It's pretending to be an outdoor person when you're not. It's sort of cultivating like a very deliberate aspect of what you're going to share with the world. And then also it's there's an element of feeling like you're in control and you have control of things. And you're not, and sometimes lightning comes out of it, and it's like the cards, like the tarot cards in that story is like there is no inherent inbuilt meaning to the cards. The meaning is what we assign to them based on what the picture arises us, And the universe didn't present a meaning for that experience to him. He had to go within himself and come up with his own meaning and determine what that meant for himself. And so, for those reasons, I think the Magician is a great card. It's the first arcana of the tarot deck. It's the first of the major arcana. It's a great card to start leading off the night with. And I'm glad he's alive to share that with us. Struck by lightning. I did not think I was going to hear that tale. That is amazing. Thank you so much. And coming next to share a story is the wonderful woman sitting next to Sam on the couch there. I had the pleasure of meeting her over Facebook. And I'm thrilled to bring on another guest from New York who's here to share a story with us tonight. Please welcome Adrienne Ben.
Thanks so much. I know we had a really big scene change. So I'm going to tell a very different story. I am a travel writer and podcaster, and I might not have a job at the end of this whole Corona thing, but I'm going to tell a story about a time I thought that I would have this job forever. So I think that I get a lot of misconceptions of being a travel writer, because when people think about travel, especially women traveling, they just think of this girl in a sundress in front of the Taj Mahal. And I promise you that she has explosive diarrhea. Like, you don't go through India, India goes through you. And I learned very early on that travel is not glamorous. And I learned that basically the first trip that I ever took, I was 19 and I was doing a study abroad in Prague, which to this day is one of the most powerful cities to me. I just was so seduced by its pastel colors and this Rococo architecture. And I fell in love with it the way that you fall in love with your first boyfriend. Like, I may tell other cities that I love them, but you'll always be first. And I was so enchanted by this city, and I got there in January, and I had a full 5 months to really enjoy it. And but around the time that the semester was up, I was kind of ready to go home. And so the night before my flight is happening, I realized that I have kind of a problem, because I'm packing up all of this stuff, and every object that has crossed my path I have just kept and squirred away. I had magazines in different languages. I had all of these different types of candy. I had, clothing that I had bought, and a puppet, just anything to tokenize every moment that I've experienced. I was just, as a 19-year-old, I was so excited. And so I'm like, shit, my suitcase is not big enough for everything that I've, I developed early onset hoarding, which I thought wouldn't affect me until my 50s, but it can strike the young as well. So my roommate comes in, and I didn't really jive with her the whole time that we were there. She was more of a North Face and Uggs kind of a girl. And she would say things like, "I'm not a princess, but..." The but indicates that you are. That's what that conjunction is there for. So we didn't really hang out that much, but she had these moments of being kind of sweet, and she said, "Oh, well, I'm going to go print out my ticket for tomorrow, because we were on the same flight back to New York. Do you want me to print yours out for you?" And that meant that I would have to walk all the way across, I don't want to say town. I would have to walk 45 minutes, take maybe a 20-minute tram ride. And I was like, I don't have time for this. And I had been in and out of the Prague airport a few times at that point for outside travel. And I was like, it's a tiny airport. It's not going to be that big of a deal. I'll get through it. And I was like, no, we'll just get there a little early tomorrow. So she leaves. And I look back down at my suitcase and I'm like, there is no way that I am going to be able to fit everything. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to put all the objects in the suitcase. My alarm went off. I'm going to put all of the objects in the suitcase, and anything that doesn't fit, I'm just going to wear it. So the next morning, I am getting ready, and I put on 2 pairs of leggings, a pair of pants, a tank top, 4 chunky winter sweaters, a coat, a scarf, and winter boots. It's May 22nd. It's basically June, and I look like a pig in the blanket, like lots of layers and a little bit of meat in the middle. And so we call the taxi cab driver that's supposed to take us to the airport, and he's super late. And so we get to the Prague airport, and we open the doors, and I walk into the line back to America. Like, the line is at the door, and we have like 45 minutes to get through everything, and there's close to 100 people in front of us. And I start sweating like a pig that knows it's dinner. And my roommate skipped diddly-doo-dahs to the front of the line because she did online check-in. And I'm just like sweating so much because I am stressed and angry and wearing so many goddamn clothes. So after about a half an hour, like, there's a few people behind me in the line, but I'm one of the last people. And I lug my suitcase up and I throw it on the weigher and on the scale, and it is 12 kilos overweight, which is 25 American pounds. That's a car tire. And the stewardess looks at me like, you stupid American. And I was like, I know I'm part of the problem. I'm so sorry right now. And so she's like, well, you can throw out some stuff, or you can get on the next flight. So I'm just like getting rid of everything that I absolutely do not need, but I'm not throwing it away. I'm just handing it off to people in the line with me. Because I'm like, I can't throw it out. Like, this yarn is still good. Like, give it a good home. And so at a certain point, this guy around my age comes up behind me, and he's so cute. And at any other point, I would have seduced him. But he's like, hey, can I help you with anything? Like, I see and I was like, yes, absolutely. As I unpack a pocket filled with pads and tampons. And I throw them in his arms, and I'm like, take these to the garbage and take my dignity with you. So I get my bag down to the appropriate weight, and now I have to run through the rest of the through the rest of the airport, and I have like 20 minutes to get to my gate. So I'm run waddling up to immigration because that's the next step. And I get up to that glass door, I get up to that glass window, and I'm just trying to fit my freaking passport in that little slot like a fucking hockey puck. And I shove it through the slot, and I hand it to the oldest Czech man alive. Like, he was born when Sir Wenceslas was anointed in the 10th century. So he takes my passport, opens it up, looks for a page, and I'm on the other side, I'm looking at his hands, and they are the same, thinness as tissue paper, and I'm like, if this guy gets a paper cut and bleeds out, I live here now, I don't have time for this. So he takes the stamp, stamps my passport, puts it down, folds it up, Dobry den. And I grab my passport and I start running, and I run up through security where I have to unspool myself and divide all of my clothes between 15 bins And I go through security and I have to rewrap myself like a present that was secretly opened the night before Christmas. And I have my passport and I have my ticket and I'm running to my gate and I like cartwheel down the gate and I make it onto the plane. And I grab my ticket and I shove it in the stewardess's hands. I just like pant for a second. And she looks at my ticket and then she looks back into economy. And she looks at me and she goes, unfortunately, we overbooked the flight, so your seat has been taken. And I'm like, well, I'm already dressed to be a bag lady. Like, I guess I'll just live out the rest of my days in Prague singing Les Mis in Czech. Like, that's my life now. So she looks at the ticket, she looks forward, and she goes, so we have to upgrade you to first class. And my brain breaks because I have been the worst person possible and I should not be rewarded for this. So I go up into my first class seat, I take off all the layers and I'm just sitting, I just immediately stick to the seat in my braless tank top. And I have a very safe flight back to America. So what's the moral of the story? Always do online check-in. That's it.
Oh my God, that's wonderful. And like a lot of the best stories, like it probably wasn't fun at the time, but that was hilarious to hear about. And unlike our previous story, there was no doubt in my mind during this one what card to pair with it. What we have for Adrian's story is the Five of Pentacles. And the Pentacles are very much about the material realm. And the Fives are sort of... there's a note of difficulty with the Fives. And I think there was difficulty navigating a lot of aspects of the physical and material world in that. There was the attachment to possessions, trying to hold on to everything, memorialize everything physically on the trip. There was the difficulty not getting the ticket ahead of time or pre-checking in, navigating the physical space of the airport. And then the other thing is, part of the reason Fives are difficult is you can divide tarot cards into the bottom and top numerologically, and the bottom half and the bottom numbers are the Earth sphere, and the top half are the Heaven sphere. And the Fives are the last of the Earth sphere before you get to the Heaven sphere and the Sixes. And I feel like all the difficulty in the material world was the Fives, and then first class is heaven. Like you got kicked into heaven, like the sphere of heaven, by being putting into first class. So you persevered through your trial, you navigated the difficulty of the Fives, and you made it to the sphere of the heavens in first class. And I love that so much. I think that's such a fun story. And I also, I love that you opened with a little bit of realness about some of the realities of travel. And, oh man, it was so fun to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And coming up next to tell a story for us is a good friend of mine. He actually shared a story with us on the first inaugural in-person Carded Tarot Tales show. And I'm really happy to have him back. This is the second time I've got to see him virtually this week. We did an open mic together earlier in the week, and like seeing him did me a world of good. It's important to maintain connections. We can at least be alone together. And here to help me not feel as alone is my good friend Sean Humphreys.
Oh, hello. By the way, my birthday is May 22nd. I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, but that's, I guess, when your winter started and you're on your trip. Since there's no feedback on this, I'm going to actually go switch to the YouTube to see if I can see my face yet. So I just got, let me see if I can show my chest here. Can you guys see that? I just got out of surgery for open heart surgery, and while I was in surgery, one of my roommates, and he's since been kicked out of the house, invited a homeless guy to sleep on my couch while I was in the hospital. And his name's Charlie. He looks, how can I best describe him? You ever see Tobey Maguire in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? He looked just like Tobey Maguire from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He's he's a musician. He's kind of a dummy. And so he was staying on the couch, and I sent a text from the hospital saying, he's got to be out of there. I can't be dealing with, I just had double bypass open heart surgery, had my kidney removed. I can't deal with having an extra person in the house. Got to get him out of here. So they said, yeah, fine. My buddy Dan was also my other roommate, and he helped him try to go get like Medi-Cal and food stamps. Was trying to help the guy out. So when I get back, find out that Charlie has not completely left. He's been sleeping in the truck that's in the driveway that my roommate had left there parked for whatever, months and months and months, maybe close to a year. And he'd been coming at night and sneaking into the truck and sleeping in there. And of course, my dog would get crazy and bark and bark and bark and bark. And it was just a crazy, crazy, crazy time. Because I'm like, I've got this open wound. I'm on painkillers. I'm not really sleeping. My dog's going crazy because somebody's coming into the yard. Finally, a couple days later, he has to come in and take a shower, do some laundry or something like that. And I confront him and I say, hey, you gotta get out of here. You can't ever come back here. I don't want to see you. Don't come in the yard. Don't stay in the car. Still comes in and tries to get in the truck later on. Eventually, I locked the car, made it so he couldn't come in the yard. We just made it just impossible for it to get him. A few days after that, he's in a fight with somebody. He comes into the driveway and bleeds all over the driveway. Like, what is going on? All this guy wants to do is just like smoke pot all day, like not worry about getting a job or fucking. I don't know. He's just a real headache. So just as we're going into quarantine, just a couple weeks ago, the night before quarantine, I'm getting texts from my neighbors saying that there's some kind of commotion going out in the yard. And it's somebody has knocked over my motorcycle. They smashed the front fence. And then after I get home, like an hour after I get home and I'm about to go to sleep, the window in the kitchen breaks. And it's from somebody have gone over the fence, and there's like a barrier at the top of the fence. It falls and it hits the window and it shatters it, goes all over the kitchen. It's crazy. I'm like, what is going on? We're about to be in quarantine. All this chaos is going on in the house. I was just like freaked out. Now, I don't know if for sure if that was Charlie. I'm going to say most likely it was. And also just that a couple days after that, I was hearing some commotion, woke me up in the middle of the night. I went out and checked, saw it was raccoons on the side of my house. I was like, okay. I shined my light. I could see their crazy raccoon eyes. I was like, okay, it's raccoons. But when I went out to go do that, I went out through the back patio, and I left the back patio door open. Sometime between when I went to sleep and in the morning, Charlie, I'm going to say it was Charlie, came in, took some food, some chicken for my dog, some oat milk, a couple cans of beans, and then later on I saw an empty can of fucking butternut squash that he had left out on somewhere else. That was my butternut squash squash soup that he had taken. So like I just was like totally plagued by this guy. Now, my motorcycle, the mirror had broken off. And so I was like, I don't know if I want to ride it because it fell onto its right side. And there was something funky going on with the brake lever. Sunday, just 2 days ago, I was going to go out. I went out on a motorcycle ride with my friends and we got out to La Cañada Flint Ridge, and we're stopping to get some gasoline. As I'm pulling up to the gas pump, I go to hit my brake and my bike falls over because like I leaned into it. It was just kind of this weird kind of like physics thing happened. But as it turned out, the brake lever just fell out. it was actually broken the whole time since when it fell over off the curb over there. And there's like the little loop, the little aluminum loop broke. So I was right on a motorcycle that didn't have a brake, that didn't have a handbrake. I could have died at any moment. Somehow I got my ass was saved by going to this gas station and trying to stop. And then when it didn't stop, the bike fell over. That's when we noticed that the brake was broken. So my buddy Dan, who, you know, he's my roommate here, he's an expert motorcycle rider. He rode it back using the back brake. Like we had it was a 20-mile ride from La Cañada, Flint Ridge, all the way to North Hollywood. He did it on the back brake. He's a goddamn lifesaver. He's a magician. But it made me realize, like, I rode the motorcycle before to kind of like get a feel for it. I could have died then. I could have died on that trip. And ultimately, I know it was Charlie. Charlie's just bad luck. He's just real dumb. He is just one of the dumbest people I know. And the lesson for my story here is stupid people will fuck you 10 times harder than people that are actually trying to fuck you. And they will just ruin your life. They won't even get anything out of it. That's the problem with stupid people, is they will steal food and then drop food on the way out, and then I know that he's here, so then I increased security. If he had half a brain in his head, he wouldn't have dropped the food, and he would have still been able to maybe sneak in here. Who knows? But this is the problem with stupid people. And that's basically my story. Don't trust stupid people. I just got the wrap-up light. Perfect timing. Back to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Sean. Oh man, you know, like it's good to be it's good to have a big heart, but like you got to defend your living space. Like that's that's really above, you know, out of bounds for a roommate. And another story where I didn't have much difficulty coming up with a card for it. We're still in the realm of fives with a little note of difficulty, but the Five of Swords. And the swords, there are a lot of conflicts in the suit of swords, and part of that is because the swords have to do with the mind, and like sometimes we overthink things, or sometimes like with the mind we use it a little bit like a child with a toy. Like he's happy playing with it at first, and then he starts thinking what's inside, and he breaks it to look inside and see how the toy works, and like. So very much note of conflict and having to defend your living space and hold on one second. Having to defend your living space and the other thing with the fives is like a lot of times they get worse. Like his story, like it was like, oh no, he's sleeping on the couch. Like that's bad. And then it's like, oh no, like it just keeps getting worse. It keeps escalating. Like they're until you forcefully bring things to an end, like it's going to continue. You have to be proactive. And like another story where I'm so glad the storyteller was able to survive in order to be there and share it with us. We had a lightning strike, and we had I guess we didn't have an accident on the motorcycle. We had a potential motorcycle accident that was avoided by sheer happenstance. But we very easily could have had a motorcycle accident. So, yeah, the Five of Swords for Sean's story. But thank you so much for sharing that with us, Sean. And now, I'm going to introduce myself. I have a story to share tonight, and I'm looking forward to it. It's a fun one, and this is a story that grew out of a show. Our last storyteller is Christopher Corbell, and this story grew out of a show that he put together, which was really fun, where we did the story of a day. He assigned us a day of the week, and our story had to take place over the 24 hours of that day. And this is my story that grew from that. So I'm actually like really religious, and I feel like that's like a weird thing to be in this day and age. And I feel like it's weird for a couple reasons. And the first is, as soon as I mention that I'm religious, I feel immediately defensive that I have to clarify that I'm not hostile to the GLBT community whatsoever in any way. Like, if if you came to my church and you wanted to get gay married, they would be fine with it. They're against marriage in general, so they'd hesitate a little bit, but not because of the gay part, because of the marriage part. Like the bishop of my church, he has a girlfriend, but like there's no. We're not big into my religion isn't really big into rules, and prescribing or lecturing people on how to live their lives. I'm not hostile to anyone, and I don't know if you can hear how defensive I'm getting as I'm telling this story, but I went to the Women's March recently, and there were people with signs shouting, if a man lies with a man, it's an abomination, and I was like, oh, like, I can't put, the brand is damaged, so I'm like, I hope people don't put me in that camp, so that's the first reason why I think it's weird to be religious, and then the second reason is I belong to a weird religion. I'm a Gnostic, and Gnosticism is a early form of what became a heretical version of Christianity, but it's an early form of alternative Christianity, and it inverts a lot of things that are typical of the biblical narratives. Like the easiest one to explain is like the narrative around Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We view Eve and the serpent as the heroes, and God as sort of the villain in that story. And the reason there's evil and suffering in the world isn't because of the fall of man and Adam eating fruit from the tree. It's because the world was imperfectly made by God. But there's a higher God who didn't make this world, who's like the true God, and that's who we worship. So it's weird, but something I've been doing a lot in quarantine is praying a lot. And there's a thing in Christian tradition called the Liturgy of the Hours, or the Daily Office. And I'm doing it pretty successfully now, but when I had the intention of doing this daily office for a long time before I actually got my butt in gear to do it. And the first night I was really trying to pray the daily office. I was doing it for a couple reasons. I was meeting with my Muslim friends later on that day for what's called a halakha group, which is like a Muslim prayer and discussion meeting. And I kind of wanted to feel like I had a little bit of parity with them, because they have, as one of the pillars of Islam, they have their 5 daily prayers, and in the Liturgy of the Hours, there's 8 prayers in the Christian tradition throughout the day, and I wanted to be like, I wanted to feel sort of, I don't feel like an outsider in the group, even though I'm not Muslim, but like, I wanted to be like on the same page. Like when we meet during Ramadan, I usually fast for that day. I don't fast for all of Ramadan, but I do the day we met so we can all break fast together, and I kind of wanted to feel like a participant. But I struggle with insomnia, and I'm supposed to be doing these daily prayers, but I know I'm not going to sleep tonight, like that night, and I'm wired. It's 2 a.m. and I'm wide awake, and I know I'm not going to go down for a while. And one of the prayers is supposed to be before bed and before you retire for the evening, but I know I'm not going to retire, so I'm like, well, it feels wrong to pray before bed, and so I don't end up praying that night, and I'm up all night, and like I know it's been a bad night because I hear the newspapers get delivered in the morning. And, there's a subtle thump, 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 and that's the Los Angeles Times, and that's hitting every house. And then there's a little bit later, there's like a thump, 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 and that's the Wall Street Journal, which fewer people subscribe to. And so I know it was a bad night. So I finally fall asleep close to 6 a.m., and then I way oversleep my alarm. So all the morning prayers, I've already all the time for morning prayer. And then I have work. I'm on a deadline. I'm doing legal transcription work, and there's a transcription project I have to turn in. So I jump right into the concerns of the world, getting this transcription done, and I do that. And then it's time. I have a therapy appointment that it takes me about 40 minutes to drive through, and I have to run out the door and get to therapy so I can so I can be okay. And just things just keep cropping up the entire day, and I don't get to pray. And in the evening, I'm about getting ready to pray, and then it's time to leave for my halakha group. And I go and I meet with my Muslim friends, and we have a really good discussion. It's I get flustered when I have to. There's Arabic pronunciation in some of the material we're reading, and that's like one of the few times I feel like an outsider in this group, because Arabic is like the official language of Islam, and Arabic is very difficult for me to pronounce. I butcher my Arabic pronunciation constantly, and then I get in my head about butchering it, and then I pronounce it even worse. So it's like. So that part doesn't go smoothly, but we have a good meeting. I'm socializing with everyone. Things are going well. And we do this thing called Dhikr. It's a repetitive prayer that's sort of part of the Sufi practice with the 99 names of Allah. And I feel like, oh, finally, I'm getting my prayer in. And we're chanting, and it's very rhythmic and almost musical. And I'm relaxing, and I'm starting to think of the divine and like bigger things in the care of the world. And then I start overthinking, and I ruin it, because I notice one of the phrases in what we're all chanting is about the prophethood of Muhammad. I recognize that much of the Arabic to be like, oh, this is about the prophet Muhammad. And I could almost be Muslim, but one of the big reasons why I can't is like I can accept Muhammad as a prophet, but not the prophet. And so now I start thinking, well, I don't really believe what I'm chanting, and as soon as that enters my head, I'm out of the moment, and my connection to the divine is severed, and I'm like kicking myself because what could have been special, I overthought and took myself out of the moment, and all I wanted to do all day and for part of the night before was pray, and it's like that was my goal for the day, and I've missed it, and I think it's really important to meet goals we set for ourselves. And I get home from this group, and it's late at night, and it's 11:57, and I'm finally able to pray. And I walk upstairs, and I get in my bedroom, and I get ready to pray, and it's 11:59, and I start, and like I snuck in under the wire. I just made it, and I begin to pray, and I get this almost like when I'm in deep prayer or deep meditation or deeply relaxed. I get this almost psychedelic vision of sort of these this rotating cross that's kind of neon purple and green in my mind's eye. And as I begin to pray, that image comes to mind. And like I know I can finally relax and let go of the cares of the world. And I know I'm going to sleep that night. And I finally prayed. And it turned into be a really good day. And that was... I fought all day to make it happen, and I literally, with a minute to spare, I got there, and that's my story of of being a weird religious guy. So thank you so much for sticking with me through that, and now I'm going to pick a card for myself, and I'm going to draw one at random, instead of trying to impose a meaning from the outside on my own story. So we'll see, and we'll try to make this fit with what I just shared. That is the Four of Swords, and that's a good card for that ends up being very appropriate for what I shared, because as I mentioned, the swords are about the mind, and there's a lot of conflict in the swords. And the Four of Swords is like a stalemate, and like my mind's racing, but it's not really going anywhere, and it's working against itself. It's the two opposing forces. So that's what was keeping me up with insomnia, was this clash of the swords of the mind. And that was me fighting against myself, where I had this intention and this thing that was important to me, but I kept putting it off, and I couldn't get to it. It was like the sword against sword from the two sides. And I think... that worked out pretty well for drawing one at random. I like that. That fits my story nicely, and that's kind of a fun thing about Tarot is there's a lot of fun synchronicities when you get into it. Things tend to match up and work out. So that was a lot of fun. And I'm excited to introduce another storyteller who was also a part of my first in-person carded Tarot Tales. So he's a returning guest. I'm really happy to have him with him. He's a great storyteller. He's currently Los Angeles-based, but I introduced him earlier as having a New York soul. Here is Chris Corbell. Oh, little bit of an issue. I'm going to bring on Chris one more time. Chris, you're a little off camera. Lower the frame a little bit. We just see the top of your head, and then I'm gonna bring you back on. Let's see. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about tarot for a moment. Chris is having some technical issue. He left my control panel. He's going to relog in, and we're going to bring him back on to close the show. But I'm proud of the tarot deck I'm using. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, it's the tarot of Jean Dodal. I am trying to pronounce French with an affectation, but Jean Dodal. And I got it from this gentleman who's big in the tarot world. I got it from his widow. It's a man named J.C. Flournoy, and he has a wonderful book on tarot that I recommend checking out called Tarot: Signposts on the Path of Perception. And he was actually the person that got me into the historic Marseille decks. I really like the historic Marseille deck. If you don't know much about tarot, most modern tarot decks come from a tradition that grew out of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is an occult group in the late 19th century. And they made some changes to the deck that they did to make it work better for occultism. They paired it with correspondences that relate to Kabbalah. And I'm actually really into all of that. But I think what's cooler than having a deck that was changed and deliberately shaped for the purposes of the occult is having the power of archetypal imagery that's been consistent for centuries. Like the earliest tarot deck I have is a reproduction that dates to 1501 or earlier. And I like that these images have been significant to humans for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think that provides more power to the stories we tell than something that was invented about 120 years ago for other purposes. And so that's why I'm using the deck that we were using. And one of the things that I really like about it is I don't know if you can quite. I'll put up a card, but tarot speaks to us in what's sometimes called is the language of the birds, and it's sort of visual poetry. It's like the unspoken language that animals and nature speaks. And one of the aspects of it is that in very traditional tarot decks, they look symmetrical at first glance, but they're not truly symmetrical. There's not a lot of symmetry in the tarot. There's minor variations. There's difference between left and right, and the more you study them, the more you can see the individual differences. So that's one of the cool things with it. And we have Chris back, and I'm very excited to have Chris Corbell. Here's our final story for the night. Here's Chris.
Hey everybody, this story takes place in the 80s, a land with no internet and cell phone. It's Thanksgiving morning, 1987, in a small Midwestern college and living in a senior dorm. I've just woken up from a night of partying. It's late in the morning, and I've just discovered that my dining hall is closed. I knock Dave's door, the guy I was partying with, but he's not responding, and I wanted to order a pizza. There's only 2 other people left in the dorm, my very cool RA, Midge, and one other guy named Johnny. I can't find Midge, but I run into Johnny. Now Johnny, he's another senior. He's a real dude. He's originally from Turkey, and he kind of looks like a young Charlie Sheen. He wears like a green leather jacket, and he smells of a very exotic cologne. Rumor has it that he is dating high school girls. And while I have known John for 4 years, we have never exchanged anything more than a hey. So I go up to him and I say, hey, you want to order a pizza? And he's like, no, man, but I know a place in town that's open. So we go to the one place in this small town that's open for lunch. It's a donut shop. And everybody there seems to know John. And we're sitting down and we're talking. And he tells me about Turkey. And I tell him that my dad, my grandfather was from Turkey. And we're talking about all sorts of stuff. And I'm realizing he's a pretty worldly and interesting guy. And I really am enjoying getting to know him. And then we walk back to the dorm after our lunch. And, we do our own things. That night, I hook up with my buddy Dave, get drunk all over again. And now we're wandering back into the dorm. And I see Johnny. He's sitting in the living room, which has been decorated by Midge with all these Thanksgiving and Christmas decorations. And he's with a bunch of people. And he asks us if we want to come and join him. But my buddy Dave doesn't want to. So we get into the elevator. And just as I think we're going to go back to our room on our floor, he wants me to go up to the 3rd floor. Now, on the 3rd floor, it's all the seniors who are in sororities. They're all girls. And he gets me to, back in the day, we had these billboards, these little cork boards that you would have on your door. And you would write messages for people who were out because we didn't have cell phones or internet. So he asked me to just start writing the weirdest things. He had to dictate because I was so drunk, whatever crazy stuff we wrote. It was terrible stuff. The only saving grace is I have very terrible handwriting, so I don't think anyone could really read what I wrote. So then when we're done, we go back to our floor, and I'm drunk, but I'm also highly dissatisfied because I really haven't done enough damage. So I go back down to the living room, see maybe if I can find my buddy Johnny, we can chat. But he's not around. So now I'm just in this living room that's been decorated in my dorm, full of Thanksgiving and Christmas. I realize there's nothing here about Hanukkah, and I'm Jewish. And that makes me mad. And I also think to myself, I really need to do some, you know what? So I just tear everything apart. I demolish. And this is a clean, honest kind of hooliganism. So good that I go to bed with a smile on my face. And then the next morning, I hear a knocking on my door. And I instinctively have a feeling I know who it is. And I open the door, and it is my RA Midge, who's a really cool, smiley, normally friendly woman, but she is in a bad mood. She looks really angry. And I look really hungover. And she says, they demolished my work. They tore everything apart. Did you see who did this horrible thing to all the work I did? And I feel really bad. And I feel really terrible. And I can't believe I did something so terrible like that because I was drunk. So I take a deep breath. And I look her in the eye and I say, you know what? I don't really know. But last night, I did see John and a couple of his buddies from town hanging out in that room. And she finishes the thought for me and goes, I knew it was him. He's never up to any good. And then when I come back after Christmas holiday, he's no longer in the dorm. He gets sent to a dorm for underclassmen, which I guess isn't so horrible since he likes young people. And to this day, I have no idea whatever happened to him. I know he graduated school. I'm still friends with Dave. And surprisingly, these women who I wrote these horrible things, maybe they're watching right now because they're still my friends. And if so, I'm terribly sorry. I hope the statute of limitations are over. Thank you and have a nice evening.
I like Chris is such a genuinely nice guy. I love his stories of misspent youth and bad behavior. That's I like that a lot, and like I like the sort of that in the drunken mind a careless oversight of not having Hanukkah decorations becomes like a big offense in the mind of the drunk, and like I love that transition, and I had to think a little bit about the card I wanted to pair for that, and I was almost tempted to go with yet another sword, because there is some conflict in that story. But what I thought was more appropriate is the Page or Valet of Wands, and I chose that card for Chris's story for a couple of reasons. Is because the page is like a squire. It's like a knight in training. It's a young adult who's not fully developed yet, and that's certainly that applies to Chris. And then the wands, it has to do with the intuition, but also like with people pleasing a little bit. Like he wants to hang out with this outside his normal crowd and wants to make an impression, and he's being told to dictate. Writing things that have been dictated to him, and that's like a total page move. That's Page of Wands for sure. And then the pages also have to do with intuition, and I like that when he's called out on it in the moment, like his intuition is to save his own skin, and that's also that's a young man. Like that's not the mature move. That's not like, oh, yes, I made this mistake, and like I apologize, or I'll write it. It's like, oh, somebody else did it, and that's such a the folly of youth. And so I really like that story a lot, and I'm very happy to be pairing that with the Page of Wands for you all tonight. And so now is the part of the show where I take all the stories we've heard together and the cards from all those stories, and we do a collective reading. And this is not going to be a reading about coronavirus or the things related to it, but like because that's what's going on in the world, like that will overshadow it a little bit. But our first card was, we had Sam Dingman, who I still like. I want to hear more about it. Like, he was struck by lightning and lived, and then struggled to find meaning for it. And I really like where he came with the light with that. But he's the magician. Then we had Adrian with her struggles with the material world, was the five of coins or pentacles. Then we had Sean with his conflict with his roommate, and because of his roommate's proxy. Via proxy with the homeless man, Charlie, we have the Five of Swords. Then we have me working against my own interest, conflict in my own mind with the Four of Swords. And then Chris, as a young man, we have the Page of, or Valet of Wands. And so what's interesting here is there's a progression. We start with the magician, and the magician is trying to harness the elements of the universe and create something, and that creation takes place in the material world, which is the fives, and often things go awry in the material world, like we heard in Adrian's story. And so the magician, in an attempt to give something, bring something new to life, faces struggles in the material world. And those struggles manifest in conflict, and not just conflict with bringing something to life, but internal conflict and external as well. And so in attempting to bring something new into manifestation, there's the struggle of materiality, but there's also the inner struggle that all ignites in us, and the struggle to find your peace in the face of it all. And so we have 2 fives in a row. I think that's appropriate to the moment. We're all facing a little bit of difficulty collectively, but then it backs off a little. We go from the 2 fives back down to a 4, and the 4 is opposing forces set against each other, which is another way of saying things are balanced. So in my story, I was fighting against myself a little bit, and there was balance and inertia there. But in the more general reading I'm doing with the cards, that balance can be a good thing. And I think that's something important while we're all socially distancing, is to think of ways we can bring balance into our lives. And the final card is the Page of Wands. And with the page, it's the it's using a skill we haven't quite mastered yet. And I think we're all sort of intuitively feeling our way through this unique moment in history. And like the page and like Kristina's story, there may be some missteps along the way because it's so new to us. But it's, the page does go on and it matures and becomes the knight. And so I think, what this reading tonight about is really, we find ourselves in a new situation. Because of that, there's some conflict. But ultimately, if we look towards balance, we'll be like the page, and eventually we might make missteps along the way, but we'll be initiated, and we have the power and ability to gain mastery over the situation and to become knights in our own mind and in control of the situation. And I think that's a logical place to end it all. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm Ryan McGranahan. This has been Tarot Tales. We've heard from Sam, Adrian, Sean, and Chris, and they were wonderful. I'm so thrilled to have had everyone on the show tonight. And I forgot to say this last week, but we will be back next week. We're doing this every Tuesday for the duration, so I hope you'll join us again. Thank you so much. Bye.